$900. At some time in the distant past, $900 was a solid amount of money to spend on a mid-range gaming PC that you were going to build yourself. But now I'm happy to say that in April 2022, things have finally improved and gotten back to the point where I can recommend you guys a very solid mid-range gaming PC for about $900 to $950. Part of that is because GPU prices are continuing to come down, and another part is that we now have good competition with 6-core, 12-thread processors around $200 from both AMD and Intel. So today I'm going to be doing what I do at the beginning of every month, recommending a couple solid computer builds for you guys at home. These are my monthly builds for April 2022.
Excellent!
Today's video was brought to you by the new Lightwings fans from Be Quiet, which combine legendary near-silent operation with optimal performance and, of course, RGB lighting. Control the look of your PC with up to 20 addressable LEDs per fan, and choose from standard PWM for airflow or PWM high speed for use with radiators and heat sinks. They're available in 120mm and 140mm sizes and suitable for any build in need of a functional and tasteful RGB upgrade. So for more on the new Lightwings fans from Be Quiet, click the sponsor link in the video description. Before I start going over the parts, I want to point out a few things. One is that I'm not actually building these PCs today, but I do build PCs on a very regular basis. If you'd like a tutorial, you can check out my 2020 How to Build a $550 Gaming PC. But I also want to let you know that I'm doing an updated tutorial and full guide for building a gaming PC. It's actually going to be a 4-part series starting in just a week or two. And one of the builds will be the budget system from today's video, so get subscribed if you're not already to stay tuned for that. But if you're building soon or you'd just like to check out some of my existing guides, my beginner's guide to building a gaming PC playlist, that's linked in the video's description as well. But here's a quick high-level look at the two builds for today. I have an AMD build that comes in at around $910 for the parts you see here, and then a very similar Intel build that basically just swaps out the CPU and the motherboard to give you an Intel build instead of an AMD build. That's currently coming in at about $937. These are just the list prices at places like Newegg and Amazon that you can buy these parts directly from. Because the goal of this series and my channel in general is to give you guys the information you need to build a gaming PC at home, and I want you to be able to pick parts that you can actually buy and not have to spend a bunch of time hunting down. One more quick note is that I actually already kind of built the Intel version of the PC I'm recommending today in my February build, so that's why I'm focusing a little bit more on the AMD build for today. But in this build, I built with the 12400 from Intel, and then in this follow-up video, I tested that build using 3 different graphics cards, the entry-level RX 6500, which I'm not recommending quite as much, as well as the RTX 3050 and the RX 6600, which is the GPU I'm recommending today. So now let's run down the parts, and as mentioned, we got the Ryzen 5 5600 as the CPU for this build. It's $200 MSRP, but right now there is a promo code, at least on Newegg, to get it for $190. And then we need a compatible AMD motherboard to go along with that, so I have the Gigabyte B550 Gaming X. But do note that the i5 12400 is very comparable in performance. It's actually a bit of a toss-up between the 12400 and the 5600 in terms of performance now, with some of the initial reviews of the 5600 that have gone up. But because that's currently selling for about $10 to $15 more, and the motherboard I chose is about $10 more, that's most of the price difference here, going from about $910 to closer to $940. Here it is though, the newly launched Ryzen 5 5600, which came out on April 4th this month. There's a $10 off promo code listing right here, which may or may not still be available. This says there's a sale that's ending very soon. It might have ended by the time you see this video, but either $190 or $200 is what you're going to be paying for the 5600 right now. And for a motherboard, I chose the Gigabyte B550 Gaming X V2, which you can currently get for about actually $125. It's actually even $5 less than what it was listing for this morning when I first popped it up. And this board actually has some reasonably nice features that you don't often see on more budget boards, like a fixed I/O shield. It does have a slightly brownish PCB, but it doesn't look too bad. It does have some heat sinks on the power delivery. I can't speak to the power delivery configuration on this board, but since we're pairing it up with a 65-watt TDP 5600, it should be just fine, even if you dabble in overclocking. There are also a couple M.2 slots for NVMe SSD expansion, and there's a front panel USB 3.2 Gen 2 port down here at the bottom, which you don't often see, again, on budget boards. That said, in the interest of providing you guys with some more options, we've also got the ASUS Prime B660-PLUS. That's just about $10 or $11 more at $136 right now. This board does not have that USB 3.2 Gen 2 front panel connector. Other than that, though, it's got a similar configuration in terms of M.2 and PCI Express expansion. And yeah, no fixed I/O shield there either, but plenty of USB ports as well as your audio. Then here's the MSI B550-A Pro, which is about $145. This one gives me a bit more similar vibe to that Gigabyte Gaming X board. It does have the USB 3.2 Gen 2 port. And this board has been out for a little bit longer, so it's, I guess, a little bit more established on the market. There's a look at the I/O as well. It does have a flash BIOS button. And another reason I chose these three boards from Gigabyte, ASUS, and MSI is they all should have a BIOS flashback option that will allow you to update the UEFI or BIOS. If you happen to get an older revision of the board, it might not recognize the Ryzen 5 5600 out of the box, so you might need to do a UEFI update before you can handle that. These boards let you do that without needing an older CPU that the board recognizes to slot in first before you can update it. That said, here's our Intel options, and the i5-12400 has sold for less than $200, but right now it's going for around $208, and that is pretty much the same price on both Amazon and Newegg, although Newegg also has a promo code going on right now. This must be to celebrate the launch of the R5 5600. So that would bring this down to, I want to say, like $195-ish. And again, it would make the total prices for the two builds that I'm talking about today a little bit more comparable. For a motherboard for the Intel rig, I have the ASUS Prime B660-PLUS. This is the same board that I built with in the February build. Pretty solid board all around, worked just fine for me. Again, no USB 3.2 Gen 2 front panel connector. But apart from that, a solid board for the price. But here I also want to point out some of the trade-offs in going with an AMD build right now versus going with an Intel build right now. If you go with an AMD build right now, you should note that their current platform with the AM4 socket is going end of life this year. Later in the year, probably towards the end of the year, maybe late summer, they will be launching the AM5 platform. That will have a brand new socket, so any CPUs from the current generation, whether it's 5000 series, 3000 series, even 1000 or 2000 series, none of those will be compatible on the new platform. So it does limit your upgrade path. On the plus side though, by going with the AMD and a B550 chipset motherboard, you do get better overclocking support. It's fully unlocked for overclocking with that setup. So if in the future you want to upgrade your cooling solution and try to push a little overclocking and dabble in that, you do have that capability with the AMD CPUs. It's also worth noting that the AMD CPUs are a little bit more power efficient than the Intel CPUs. It's not by much, but it's by about 10 or 20% depending on the workload. With Intel right now, we are anticipating that there will be a potential upgrade path because Intel also has a new family of processors launching towards the end of the year, and those should still be LGA 1700 like their current 12th gen CPUs, and they should slot into existing motherboards. Intel has not 100% confirmed that, but it seems likely based on a lot of the rumors and stuff coming out about the next generation. And while with Intel you do still have to pay more of a premium to get fully unlocked hardware, you need a Z690 motherboard and a processor that has a K on the end like the 12700K or the 12900K. You can still get a bit of extra performance by going with a non-K CPU and a B660 or H670 motherboard. Those you can still plug in the memory XMP values for the memory that you install, so you're at least not going to be running at the base default memory speed. Other than that though, like I said, in terms of gaming and compute performance, these processors are really well matched, and the difference between them is typically only something like 2 to 4%, and they trade blows. It goes back and forth depending on the test that you're running. Now I'll run down the rest of the parts of the build, and do note that you don't need to choose exactly the parts that I'm recommending. So if you find other parts that are similar spec then you know will be compatible, you can swap those in or out. I'm looking for good deals here and parts that start towards the floor of the pricing for the given component and the specification. So if you're looking at memory, for example, and you're looking at a 16 gig kit that's about 3600 speed, you might note that you can get something like that for about $60 with this Team Group T-Create Expert kit right here, which has a nice gray finish that should blend in with the rest of your build, even if you're adding some color otherwise. And I chose this because at DDR4 3600, with the AMD system in particular, it will cause the Infinity Fabric to run at half that rate, which is 1800 megahertz. The timings on this could definitely be better. It's CL18, 22, 22, 42. Lower timings are better. So if you're willing to spend an extra $5, $10, $15, you can get slightly better specs on the memory than this, but it will only lead to very marginal increased performance. I also included an XPG Gamix kit here, which is just a few bucks cheaper, even at $57. This is 3200 speed instead of 3600 speed. Cast latency 16, which timing is 16, 20, 20. It doesn't even list all the timings. This might be a good kit to pair up with the Intel configuration because the Infinity Fabric is less of a concern, but just note that there are multiple 16 gig options in the $60-ish range. For storage, you need storage. You don't necessarily need to have the fastest storage. It's not going to affect gaming performance. It might affect gaming load times. But this Team Group MP33 is sort of down towards the entry level of NVMe SSDs, which are significantly faster than 2.5-inch standard SATA SSDs. So in my opinion, it's worth upgrading to something like this. And for $44, a 512 gig version of this drive is a really solid deal in terms of price per gigabyte, even if you're putting it up against slower SATA SSDs. While I'm at it, note that you can swap to the 1 terabyte version of this for $75, which is an even better price per gigabyte. 2 terabyte model is $180. That's not as good of a deal. Then we just have to round things out with a few more components. So the case I'm still sticking with for this recommendation is the Fractal Focus G. Like I said, I built in this case in the February build, so check out that video if you want to see me assembling a system and how it all comes together and looks at the end. This is also available in a few other colors like blue, red, and white. I guess it has gone up to $56 instead of $55. But I do want to note I will likely not be doing my tutorial build in this specific case. I will choose a case that's comparable to it that's probably in the $60 to $80 range. And that's mostly because I've already built in this case, so I don't necessarily need to build again. For a power supply, you should look at your graphics card. Either the graphics card you currently have or the graphics card you aspire to. Look at the power supply recommendation for that graphics card. Note that if you're looking at something like an RTX 3080, you probably want to go bigger with something like a 750 watt power supply. If you're not planning on upgrading to a higher wattage graphics card in the future though, you can easily get by with 550 or 600 watts. Again, your graphics card is what mostly determines what wattage you should shoot for in a power supply, and going over isn't really bad at all either. Just don't pay too much money for more wattage that you're not going to use. So this Silverstone SST ET750 for about, it usually fluctuates between about $60 and $70. I've recommended it for a while because Silverstone is a solid brand. It's 80 plus bronze rated. It has these flat black ribbon cables that should blend in with your build and are fairly easy to route and angle to your heart's content when you're doing cable management. So that's a good option there. But I also found this one from Superflower. Superflower is actually an OEM. They manufacture the power supply, which is a little bit more rare. Actually, most power supplies from places like EVGA or Corsair are not actually manufactured directly by EVGA or Corsair. That said, the reason I pulled this one up is because it's 80 plus gold rated. It's a 650 watt unit and it is $60. There's even an additional promo code, which I haven't even accounted for in my overall pricing, that can bring the price down by another $5. Sold by Superflower and shipped by Newegg, so there's another option for you guys. If 650 watts is sufficient for your needs for whatever graphics card you're aiming for, this one is going to be a little bit more efficient. And while they don't have pictures of all of the cables, I can at least tell from the non-modular part coming out here that they do all appear to be that same flat black ribbon style. So going back to our overall list, we have now accounted for everything except for the graphics card. And you might note that I'm recommending the RX 6600, which you can currently get for about $370. That's down even more from last month when I said, hey guys, graphics cards have dropped in price a lot. But you don't have to go with this graphics card specifically. You have options. If you remove this from the list, then the price drops to around $550-ish. And from there, you can add on a GPU. I'm gonna go over the ones that I recommend and also the ones that I would kind of warn against. The entry-level, cheapest GPU that's readily available, that's from the current generations of graphics card, we're talking 6000 series from AMD or the 30 series from NVIDIA, is the 6500 XT, which should MSRP for $200. And if you watched my video on the 6500 XT when it launched, you might know I don't wholeheartedly recommend. Yes, it is a functional graphics card that you can buy for as little as $225-ish right now, but you only get 2 video outs. The PCIe interface is limited to a by 4 connection, so it's really not a good card to slot into anything with the PCIe 3.0 setup, which isn't the case, by the way, with the builds I'm talking about today, which is why in extreme situations, some people might opt for the 6500 XT if they're really on a budget. So yes, you could go with something like this $225 ASRock Phantom Gaming D, and the total price of this build would be around $760 to $770. But please only do that if you know and understand some of the limitations of the 6500 XT and they're not going to be a big deal for you. What I'm recommending for about $140 to $150 more is the RX 6600, which is an 8 gig card, so you get twice as much VRAM, and you also get significantly more performance. Here's a look at my tests with the 12400K. 6600 is on top. That's a lot more frames than either the RTX 3050 or the 6500 XT. Here's Dirt 5, it's a little bit closer, but still way more frames from the 6600. And also note how much better the 6600 is doing than the RTX 3050. Here's Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I don't want to dwell on this too much. This video is linked in the description if you want to check out the whole thing. So that is why I'm recommending the RX 6600, and note that the MSRP of the RX 6600 is $330. So $330 to $370 isn't even that significant of a markup. So for me that helps a little bit too, just knowing that you're not paying an absurd amount over MSRP. Here's another RX 6600. This is the Sapphire Pulse, which I think is probably a slightly better built card than that ASRock. And with this $20 off promo code, you can get it for $380, just 10 bucks more. And then a couple more GPUs here that have come down in price. Again, I would recommend the RX 6600 over the RTX 3050 right now. This is $350. At least it's a little bit cheaper. But yeah, I'd rather spend $370, $380 for the 6600. But I am also keeping my eye on the RTX 3060, which you can currently get for about $470 over on Newegg. Still a bit high for my liking. The RTX 3060 has the same MSRP at launch, at least, of $330 as the 6600. So it would be really cool to see this one come down in price enough to be comparable there. At this price, it's still a little bit too high for my taste. And that's pretty much it for looking at the parts from my build. I want to give a quick shout out to some of the sites I use to help find this information. Camel is a great site for looking at price histories for products to let you know, is this a good price? Or did they raise the price last week and then lower it this week to make me think I was getting a good deal when in reality I'm just paying the normal price? And then of course PC Part Picker, a great resource for getting a build parted out. You can select your individual parts, you can check out builds other people have done, and you can use a system builder to choose all the parts that you need. It's an excellent website. Before I go though, I'd like to say one last thing. I am doing 2 builds for my build of the month, or for my tutorial series this month, and one of them I'm going to use this graphics card, the Palette GameRock OC RTX 3090 Ti, which is an absurd $2,200-ish over-the-top graphics card. It's right here, or I would hold it and show it to you guys directly, but stay tuned to my next video later in the week where you'll find out what's going on with this right next to me. But my plan is to do 4 videos. One is going to be a beginner's guide going over all the parts of the PC and getting people familiar with them who have never tried it out before at all. The second is going to be a budget build, the parts that I went over today, the core functional components that you need to assemble to get a functional gaming PC. The third build is going to be the over-the-top build, and that's what I'm going to use the 3090 Ti for. Because in my experience, going from a basic build to sort of an over-the-top one where you add RGB, and I guess a lot of it's RGB, but just extra aesthetic elements, or additional components that you might put in there, or PCIe riser cables, stuff like that. So that super high-end build will be talking about all of the extra elements that go into a setup like that versus the basic budget build. And then the 4th video in the series will be all about system setup, software, and then maybe doing a bit of testing with the systems. So my question for you guys is, what should I pair that 3090 Ti with? I need to figure out a case, storage configuration. I'm pretty sure I'm going to go with an Intel build for that one since I'm doing AMD for the budget system. But if you guys have any suggestions in terms of component selection or anything specific that you'd like to see me do with that build that isn't typically covered in basic budget system assembly, then by all means leave those comments in the comment section down below. While you're down there, you can find the links to the parts I talked about today. You can also find links to my How to Build a PC Beginner's Guide playlist, as well as my store, where you can help support my channel by getting yourself some merchandise, t-shirts, mugs, pint glasses, beer sets, and more at paulshardware.net. Lastly, your engagement helps me out a ton, so if you want to leave me a comment down below, hit the thumbs up button, or of course subscribe so you'll be notified when the new How to Build a PC tutorial series comes out. That would also be awesome. Thanks again for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next video.